Thanks for dropping in on the Evolve and Revolve podcast series. Today, I want to talk to you about something that I think is holding a lot of people back. It's something that pretty much everybody does, and I mean, for all I know, you could be doing it right now. It's something that I used to do all the time, and I had to stop doing it to find out why it was beneficial to not do it. Now, this thing that I'm talking about is basically endorsed, accepted, and encouraged by just about everybody, everywhere you go. And even if somebody had told me back then why it would be beneficial for me to stop doing this specific thing, I wouldn't have listened. So it comes as no surprise to me that many of you are probably going to turn this recording off once you find out what it is that I'm talking about, and then I will be left talking to myself. So I'm really hoping that you will stick around, whether it's to hear my theory or just to keep me company so I'm not talking to myself. Either way, I'm really hoping that you'll stay and listen to the whole thing, and maybe even take my advice. We'll see. So this thing that I want to talk to you about that a lot of people are doing that I feel is holding you back, I think if you want to move forward, you need to stop smoking pot. You need to give up the ganja. Now in my head I can already hear a bunch of you booing and telling me, no, shut up. And I'm sure some of you have already clicked off the video by now. I'm sure a lot of you have probably turned off this recording, but I'm hoping you don't. I have nothing against marijuana whatsoever. I started smoking it at the age of 15, and I didn't stop until I was 38. I took some small breaks here and there, but for a long time, sobriety and I were not on speaking terms. We were mortal enemies. I understand that medical marijuana serves many purposes and, has a lot of uses. And if you're responsible about it, it's not a problem. It's not a big deal. I totally get that. Now, maybe you're the type of person who only smokes weed at night. Once the kids have gone to bed and, you're ready to relax, smoke a little bit, have a little snack, watch a little TV, fall asleep. Or maybe you're the kind of person who only smokes socially. You and your friends get together and one of your friends has it, and so you smoke it or whatever, and it's not a big deal. You just hit it once in a while. It's not a way of life. Okay, that's cool. But hopefully you'll still listen to this anyways. Because even if that's your style, for most stoners, weed is what life is all about. You see these people with, it's not just that they smoke from the time that they wake up to the time they go to sleep. It's that their life revolves around marijuana and marijuana related things. You see people walking around with t-shirts and beanies and pins on their clothes and socks with marijuana leaves on them. You see people with bumper stickers on their cars, or like, if you look at their DVD collection, half of their DVDs are weed movies. Dazed and Confused, Cheech and Chong, stuff like that. Friday, Pineapple Express. But whether it's a cultural or social thing, or whether it's an addiction thing, or whether it's because everything seems better when you're high, that seems to be true. And I mean, let's face it, the problem is not enjoying things when you're high, okay? Because, yes, food tastes better when you're high, and, things are funnier when you're high, cartoons are amazing when you're high. That's not the problem. The problem is not enjoying things when you're high. And I think if you're being honest with yourself, you already know that. The problem is all the side effects that come from being high during all of your waking hours, and all the general side effects that come from marijuana and being high specifically. So, regardless of what's got you living that lifestyle, as I said, pretty much every stoner lives that lifestyle. And today's podcast is to try to help get some of you to understand how this is negatively impacting you and how much this is holding you back from things that you want to do. I'm trying to get you to understand how much better your life will be in general and in specific aspects if you stop smoking marijuana. Because when you stop, one aspect of your life will get better, and then that will lead to other aspects of your life getting better. The only way I can think of to describe it is like what they call a telephone tree, or I guess you could even call it like a rumor chain. Like in a rumor chain, you tell one person, and that person tells 3 people, and each of those 3 people tells 3 more people. Okay, well, it's the same thing here. You stop smoking weed, and one thing gets better, and that one thing leads to 3 other things getting better. And each of those 3 things getting better leads to 3 other things getting better, and eventually your whole life starts to show improvement. And I want you to understand, I am not putting down people who smoke weed. I am not saying that it needs to be illegalized again. I am not against it. I am not telling anybody not to utilize medical marijuana. I'm not saying anything bad about you or your choices or marijuana itself. I totally get it. But what I do think is that if you want to make improvements in your life, you want to make progress in your life, in your personal growth, your financial growth, your emotional growth, that one of the best things that you can do for yourself is to quit smoking weed. Now, anybody who knew me in high school, or even for the first couple years after high school, would really feel like they have to check their brain when they hear me say this. They would stop and say, did I really just hear Chris Patterson say that somebody should stop smoking pot? And that's because for so long, I lived for marijuana. I mean, sobriety was my enemy, and I could not function without being high. I could only function with weed in my system. I used to work at a fine arts foundry, and I was there for 9 years, and during the last probably 3 years that I was there, I was responsible for 200 plus pounds of 2,000 degree liquid metal. And I mean, this shit is like lava. Like if a little drop of it spills out and lands on your foot, it's going to go through your shoe, through your foot, through your shoe again, and into the ground. And you're going to have a hole in your foot. And I was responsible for this 3 or more times a week, and I could not perform this task if I was not baked off my ass, because I would be too shaky and it would spill. Even if it didn't get near getting on me, it would still spill, or I would drop the pieces that I was trying to cast. I would have accidents. It was unsafe for me to function in that job without being completely lit. And for anybody who's done that job or seen somebody do that job, that is kind of a frightening thought, to know that the person who's doing it is completely fucking loaded. Now, for anybody who's at that point, especially because marijuana has been legalized in so many states and it's literally everywhere you go. I mean, it's on TV shows, it's in movies, it's become an inside joke in so much of pop culture, and it influences people's lives in so many ways. It's endorsed and encouraged everywhere you go by pretty much everybody. Like, how many of you out there know a stoner or two or more who get excited whenever anybody makes a weed reference, you know, anywhere, whether it's there's a bumper sticker or, you know, a cartoon makes a weed reference, or there's somebody in the background of a movie who's smoking a joint, whatever it is. Or even if it's somebody just straight out saying like, hey dude, I'm so high. People are going to be like, yeah, right on, bruh. You know, like, if you think about it, it's just like that scene in Almost Famous where the guy's going to jump off the roof and somebody goes, do you have any famous last words? And he goes, I dig music. And the crowd's like, yeah, okay, you know, whatever. And then he goes, I'm on drugs! And everybody applauds. The whole place goes nuts. You know, I mean, this guy's going to jump off the roof and kill himself, and they're excited and cheering because he stated that he's on drugs. And that's kind of how it is in society. You know, no matter what kind of stupid shit you're doing, if you tell people you're high while you're doing it, they're going to cheer and applaud, because that's how weed culture is. And again, I'm not putting down weed culture. I'm not putting down high times. I need to make this clear. I'm not putting down people who smoke weed. I just want you to see how it's holding you back. When I was in high school, my senior year English teacher asked me, how do you smoke as much pot as you smoke and stay as smart as you are? And you know what I told him? Practice. And we both kind of chuckled about it. And then, you know, I straightened up for a minute and I said, but seriously though, the flip side of it is that I can't, because I do everything high, I can't do anything if I'm not high. I'm great at doing things while I'm high, but I'm terrible at doing them when I'm sober. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, okay, what are the three major things that people experience when they're stoned? They laugh at everything, they get tired, and they get the munchies. And I have all that when I'm high. But the problem is that if I'm not high, I am in a terrible, horrible, pissy mood. I'm very impatient. I won't eat no matter how physically hungry or empty my stomach is, because I don't have an appetite because I'm not high. And I cannot sleep. I could lay in the bed for as many hours as I want and tell myself that it's time to go to sleep, but it doesn't matter. If I wasn't high, it wasn't going to happen. And he said, that sounds pretty terrible. And I said, I know. But it's the trade that I make for staying high all day long, which makes life more enjoyable. So does that sound like you? Does that sound like a situation that you're in if you're still listening to this and you haven't turned off this recording yet? Because if it does, then I think it would probably be a good idea for you to continue listening to this recording. I think it might be beneficial for you to continue listening to what I have to say. You don't have to agree. You don't even have to try it. I'm just asking that you give it some thought. And maybe some things will get better for you. Let me ask you this. How often do you lose your train of thought in a conversation when you're really baked? How many times do you catch yourself going, fuck, what was I just going to say? Okay, you were talking about this, and you said it was funny, and that it made you laugh, and then it made me think of that song by that girl. Oh God. Okay, what was I gonna say? Crap. Okay, say it again. Say that thing you said again. Like, come on. I mean, even if you can manage to reclaim your train of thought, you can manage to retrace your steps like that and figure out what it was that you were going to say. You figure out the domino effect of your train of thought. This thought led to this thought, led to this thought, and that's what leads you back to what you were going to say. Even if you can pull that off, it still makes you look bad, especially if you're having this conversation with sober people. You know, but it's even worse when you're trying to have a conversation with your boss or with a potential boss, a potential mate, or even a potential friend. Like, do you really want to have that kind of a conversation with somebody where you have to sit there and retrace your mental steps while they wait for you, whether they're waiting patiently or impatiently? They gotta wait for you to figure out what you were gonna say. And I'll tell you, I got tired of having conversations like that. And now that I don't smoke pot anymore, I have a lot less conversations like that. They still happen, but I very, very rarely find myself having to retrace my mental steps or walk backwards down the train tracks of my thoughts. I rarely find myself asking, shit, what was I going to say? You know, and in this line of work where I'm giving motivational speeches, if I have to get up in front of a crowd, that is a terrible spot to be in. I mean, can you imagine how embarrassing to be there and be like, give me just a second. Okay, let's see. I said this, and then it was supposed to lead to this. Crap. Okay, hold on. I'll remember in a second. Hold on. When you've got a large group of people waiting for you to figure out what the hell you're supposed to be talking about, and this is what you're supposed to be doing, it's pretty unprofessional and pretty embarrassing. I'm not saying that a lot of you are out there giving large talks to large groups of people, but what I am saying is that this is no way to live. You know, it's not worth it. I was at a point back when I was smoking where it seemed like I had 2 brain cells left and they were not on speaking terms with each other. So, therefore, I lost a lot of thoughts. I wasted a lot of time and I wasted a lot of opportunities. I made a lot of choices that at that moment didn't seem like a big deal. But then, looking back later, whether later that day, later that week, or later on in life, a lot of those lost thoughts cost me something. Something that at the moment I didn't realize I was missing out on. I didn't realize what I might be losing. But I made a lot of poor choices. Financially, emotionally, mentally, personally, socially, interactively. I made a lot of bad choices because I was so high. And I couldn't see outside of the box that I had painted myself into. So now, I'm trying to help you escape the box that you've painted yourself into. I'm trying to help you escape all of these things that are weighing you down because you refuse to stop smoking weed. I realize that, you know, weed life is ingrained in hip-hop culture and hippie culture and most pop culture in general. It's there in most subcultures, genres, most social tribes, whatever you want to call them. Weed is accepted, encouraged, and endorsed almost everywhere you go by almost everybody that you meet. Even if they don't address it immediately, they don't make it clear that they're okay with it, it's still there. When you interact with these people, eventually it's still going to come to the surface. And that's okay. But what I'm saying is that if you're smoking weed all day long, a lot of your dreams are just going to pass you by. A lot of opportunities are going to pass you by. No matter how well you can function when you're high, no matter how good you can drive your car or perform your job or have a conversation when you're high, there are a lot of things that you're never going to achieve for whatever reason, because it's holding you back. There are a lot of improvements that you probably want to make right now in your life that you aren't making, and it's indirectly related to the fact that you smoke weed all day long, or even every day, even if it's not all day long, every day. It doesn't matter what, but it's costing you something somewhere. Somewhere there is something slipping out of your grasp because you won't stop smoking weed, whether it's a relationship or a career or something physical. Your relationship with weed is going to cost you something, and you've got to decide whether it's better. You've got to decide whether it's better for you to let go of the weed and hold on to the thing that's slipping away, or to keep getting high and lose something that might be important to you. So, perfect example, let's talk about how family comes into play when you're smoking weed. If you have kids, you'll probably want to listen in right here. When I was a kid, everybody that I looked up to, whether they were famous, whether they were somebody that I knew from around my house, around my block, or around my hood, everybody that I looked up to smoked weed, smoked cigarettes, drank, maybe did worse things. I knew very, very few sober people, sober adults, when I was a kid. And so I grew up basically embracing the concept that it was okay. And around the age of 16, I got kicked out of Disneyland for smoking a joint. And my parents said, okay, look, we know you smoke weed. We know that you know we smoke weed. So we can't tell you not to, and we're not gonna. What we're gonna tell you is that it's okay for you to get stoned in the house, because we'd rather have you be in the house where we know that you're safe than be out somewhere on the street where you could get in trouble with the police. We'd rather have you be here, sitting in your room, where we know you're okay, than be out there getting into trouble. And I thought, wow, my parents are so cool. But if they hadn't been smoking weed, they wouldn't have told me that. Right? And a lot of you don't know this, especially you younger cats, you millennials, that doing drugs, including smoking weed, stunts your emotional growth. Okay? So whatever age you first smoke at, or do drugs, whatever, that's emotionally the age that you are going to stay for as long as you're getting high. So I started smoking at 15, and I got real heavy into it at about 16, and it took a very long time for me to emotionally grow past the age of 16. I spent a very, very long time, all the way up into my middle 30s pretty much, thinking, acting, behaving like a 16-year-old, making choices the way a 16-year-old would make choices. And it did not work out to my advantage. That is for damn sure. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not putting my parents down for making that decision. That was like probably the best decision they could have made at that point, because they knew they couldn't tell me not to smoke it, because then it would have become a battle about hypocrisy and double standards rather than the intention of making good choices. So I see where they're coming from, and again, that was probably the best choice they could have made. But at that same time, I've spent the last couple of years looking back and thinking how different my life would have been if I had never smoked weed in the first place, or if I had quit at a much younger age. Now, I want to take this moment to point out that there are positives and negatives to that thought, to the question of who and where I would be now if I had never smoked pot. I refer you to the comedian Bill Hicks, who points out, he says, I believe drugs have done some good things for us. And if you don't agree with me, that's fine, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to go home tonight, I want you to take all your albums, all your tapes, and all your CDs, and just burn them. Just throw them in the fire. Because you know what? All those musicians who made all that music that's enhanced your lives throughout all those years, really fucking high on drugs. But he's absolutely right. I mean, some of the best music in the world was written under the influence of marijuana and probably even more serious drugs. And I agree that some of the things I've done in my past creatively, you know, some of the art I've created, some of the music I wrote, some of the performances I gave, that they would be very different if I hadn't spent so much time smoking weed. You know, I understand that everything I've gone through in my life, whether good or bad, has made me who I am today. And for the most part, I like who I am today. Yeah, there's some things I would have done differently, but everybody has that. And if you don't stop and analyze that, you don't learn anything. So I appreciate that I'm learning lessons, and I appreciate how the level of creativity that I reached, but at the same time, you have to ask yourself, is it a fair trade? Are the things that I lost because of that worth the creative things that I came up with? And for the most part, the answer is no. If you're not a album label signed musician, or, you know, an artist who's got his own gallery, if you're not doing something with that creative outlet that is serving a major purpose, whether to change people's lives or to take care of you in your life, then one way or the other, you traded and it wasn't worth it, in my opinion. And I understand that. But when I look back and I wonder what could be different, I start to ask, what problems might I not have had? What mistakes might I not have made? Let's go back to the obvious one. How much money would I still have to spend on other things if I hadn't spent so much money on smoking pot? I mean, seriously, like, I spent so much money on weed over the years that if I could have it all back right now, I would be set for the next 5 years. All my bills would be paid, all my groceries would be bought, gas in my car, no problem. We're talking probably a couple $100,000. So I'm getting sidetracked. Let's get back to family and kids. I have 2 kids. I have a 17-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. And when I was in high school, I had a party crew called Hits from the Bong. And all we did was smoke weed and do graffiti. We would get together, we would get high, we would smoke, we would do drawings, we would go places, take road trips, do graffiti. You didn't get jumped in, you got smoked in. was a party crew to the fullest extent of the word. And when Hits from the Bong disbanded, I started another one with some other friends called ACS, which stood for Abusing Chemical Substances. It also stood for Associated Chronic Smokers, Assorted Cannabis Slangers, Alien Crime Syndicate, Always Calling Shots. I mean, when we were sitting around smoking, we had nothing better to do but come up with possible phrases for what ACS could stand for, right? I mean, what were we doing? We're sitting around getting high and doing nothing. But so, back to Hits from the Bong. When I was in Hits from the Bong, we took a lot of photographs of everything we did and everywhere we went. We had a photo album that was just full of pictures that we took during our gatherings, during our road trips and our graffiti fests. And we had to take all these pictures because it was the only way we could remember this stuff. And one day, my kid's mom found the photo album and she was upset about it. She said, "What the fuck is this and why do you have it?" And I said, "It's a photo album of all my memories from back then. All the places we went, all the people we hung out with, and it's the only way I can remember." And she said, "Huh. So why do you still have it?" And I said, "Because it's the only way I can remember." And she said, "Well, what are you going to do when the kids find this one day? Are you going to do what your parents did and show them how cool it is to be high all the time?" And I didn't have a good response for that. So I thought about it and I said, "No, that's not what I want." And she said, "Okay, well then you need to throw it away." And so I threw it away because, I came to realize that it was stupid to begin with. Yeah, it was a collection of, of our artwork and our graffiti, and it was, a way to celebrate what we did, but really, what were we celebrating? What did we do? Were we celebrating all the brain cells that we lost that weren't going to come back? So I threw it away, but that was just one tiny step. I was still smoking pot. And for the next couple of years, my life continued to steadily go downhill because I had not stopped smoking pot. I was doing it consistently from the time I woke up to the time I went to sleep, just like I had when I was in high school. And whether it was financially or emotionally or relationally, like, yeah, that probably wasn't a word before now, but it is now. I just made it up. You're welcome. But in all those ways, my life was falling apart. Whether it was the side effects of the pot itself or how much money I was spending on it, all those things came into play. So, back to the kids. When I first got divorced, I used to take the kids to the movies a lot. And we were almost always late. We almost always missed the previews, and sometimes even the first 5 minutes of the movie. Sometimes it was because I spent too much time getting high before we left. And sometimes it was I didn't have a car, so we had to take the bus, and maybe I got us on the wrong bus, or I got us on the right bus, but we got off at the wrong point because I was too high and I wasn't paying attention, or whatever. And so, like I said, a lot of mistakes were made throughout those years that I spent getting high. Simple, small mistakes that could have been avoided if I had been sober. And one of these days, when we missed the first 5 minutes of the movie, my son asked me, "Daddy, how come every time we go somewhere, we're late? We're always late. We're late to the movies, we're late to birthday parties. We get off the bus at the wrong spot, or we get on the wrong bus. How come all these things happen when me and you go places together?" And I tried to play it off. I said, "Because drugs are bad, okay?" And we laughed about it because at that point, he'd seen South Park. He got the reference. He knew. But it didn't really answer his question. And that's because there was no good answer. There was no excuse. So I just told him, I'm sorry, buddy, and you know what? I'm going to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore. And it's true, but it was really hard for me to do until I stopped smoking pot. Once I stopped smoking weed, I found it easier to be on time to places and to things. I found it easier to smell good and to be responsible. I found it easier to carry on a conversation, especially professional conversations in a professional environment. I found it easier to gain the respect of my coworkers and my supervisors. You know, I mean, I found it easier to display my intelligence, to keep my train of thought, to come across as somebody who was respectable and reliable. Almost everybody that I know that's still smoking pot, I'm going to say 95% of them are late to everything. It doesn't matter what it is, they are late. And like all the people that I work with that smoke pot on a regular basis, they make all these small mistakes and create situations for themselves that they wish they weren't in. We have conversations where they're like, oh man, I did this and I shouldn't have. Or I forgot to do this, I forgot to clock in. I can't remember what time I clocked out for lunch, so I can't remember what time I have to clock in at. You know, and these are all situations that they wouldn't be in if they had a clearer head. Now, I want to point out that most people who smoke weed don't feel like it's holding them back. I know that most of you out there who smoke are going to disagree with me when I say that it is in fact holding you back. But let me ask you a couple questions. Are you still living paycheck to paycheck? Even though you manage to buy weed every paycheck and smoke every day? Are you still working a job that you don't like because you never make the time to go look for a better one? Are you still living in your parents' house and smoking weed every day, but you live with your parents even though you have a job? And my last question, have you ever turned down a job that would be better than the one that you have, or better for you than the one that you have, but you turned it down because you know they're going to drug test you, and you know you won't pass, and you're not willing to quit long enough to pass? If you answered yes to any of those questions, then yes, weed is holding you back. And I know you probably think it's okay because I'm sure all your friends do it, your partner probably does it, your parents probably do it. Hell, I know a lot of you are out there getting high with your parents right now, and I'm not putting that down. I'm just trying to help you improve your situation. So, okay, if your parents do it, let's look at their situation. Are they living paycheck to paycheck? Or are they living the lives that they've always wanted? Are they happy with their circumstances? Are they happy with the home that they have or that they live in? Are they happy with the cars that they're driving? Because if they're not happy with those things, if they're still struggling, if they're still living paycheck to paycheck, think about it. They've probably been smoking weed for twice as long as you have. And they probably never stopped and analyzed whether or not weed was holding them back, even if just financially. So let's look at their lives, let's look at their circumstances, and consider that if they had stopped buying weed or smoking weed 20 years ago, that their lives would be exponentially better than they are right now. So if this applies to your parents, then think about it and decide whether or not it's going to apply to you 20 years from now. And if it is, then yes, weed is holding you back, and it's time to let it go. Which leads me to the next and probably final reason why you should give up smoking weed. If you want to make improvements in your life, in yourself, in your situation. I don't know about you, but I'm the kind of person where it's all or nothing. If I have some weed, I'm gonna smoke it. I can't just leave it there. I can't save it for another day or just whenever I feel like it. Maybe I'll smoke some later, maybe I won't. Like, no. If I have a pack of cigarettes, I'm gonna smoke them. If I have a bottle of alcohol, I'm gonna drink it. You know, I'm not one of those people who can just buy weed and just have it sitting there. I used to work with this guy named Vince. Vince was a great guy. We worked at the record store together. Vince was a tall southern boy from Texas, good-looking guy, really, like, nice guy to be around, always super considerate of other people. Never a bad time with Vince, ever. Vince was working at a record store, minimum wage job, in his late 20s, lived in the guest room at his parents' house, and he would buy weed and just have it for when company came over. And this blew my mind. We'd be hanging out and he'd be like, hey, I got some weed, you want to smoke? And I'd be like, yeah, all right. Or whoever was there, yeah, let's have some, whatever. And so he'd pull it out, and he'd pull out his pipe, and everybody'd take a couple hits, pass it around, and everybody'd be good. And that was it. And then when he ran out, he'd go buy some more, but not to smoke it then, to have for the next time company came over. And this blew my mind because I can't imagine doing it that way. Because as I said, with me, it's all or nothing. I'm not like that. I can't do that. And so as I said, I would smoke from the time I woke up to the time I went to sleep. I know that a lot of you stoners out there are doing that same exact thing. I know that that's a very easy cycle to get into, especially if you're somewhere where you have access to weed all the time, if you grow it or if you know somebody else who grows it. And, like we talked about, it's socially encouraged and everybody thinks it's great and supports your choice. And, everywhere you go, if you go, dude, I am so baked, people are going to be like, right on, bro. But really, is that the correct response? I mean, like, should they be more concerned with whether or not you're being responsible? Maybe, maybe not. But with that said, we're talking about being high from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep. Let's forget all about finances. Let's forget about all the money that you spend on smoking weed and staying high from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep. Let's just address and consider how this affects your body. Let's go back to what I was saying a little while ago about what happens when you don't have it. Nobody who smokes weed all day wants to think about the possibility that you might run out. But it happens. It happens. I know California is full of medical marijuana dispensaries. They're everywhere you go. But nonetheless, there are times and circumstances where you're going to run out. And I remember before medical marijuana dispensaries came about, I had a lot of times when I couldn't get a hold of my guy, and I couldn't get a hold of any of my friends, or I could get a hold of my friends, but they couldn't get a hold of their guy, and so I was out of it against my will, and I would have to spend a day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever, without weed, and I would be completely useless. I couldn't function, I couldn't think straight, and I'm sure I was a real joy to be around. I was very impatient. You couldn't have a conversation with me. I couldn't focus. I couldn't function. I couldn't focus. I probably didn't get any of your jokes, and even if I did, I wasn't going to laugh at them. And is this the spot that you're in right now? If you're one of these people who's smoking all day, if you were to not have access to marijuana tomorrow for 2, 3, 4 days, is that where you would be? Where you're snapping at everybody who talks to you? Where you're impatient? Where you're miserable? You can't eat, you can't sleep? Anybody who has smoked weed consecutively for a couple of days, not even necessarily every day, let's just say a couple of days in a row to a week or two, you know how hard it is to fall asleep without being high. So think, what if you've been smoking weed all day every day for a year, or for 2 years, or 10 years? How hard is it going to be when you are out against your will? When you don't have it and there's nothing you can do about it? Think about what that might cost you. And the reason I want you to think about that now is because when you're in that spot, you can't think clearly about what it's going to cost you. You can't think clearly at all. And it's not the kind of not thinking clearly that you have when you're high, because you're pleasant when you're high. It's the kind of not thinking clearly where once it passes and you finally do get high again and you're back to your normal self, you're going to have a lot of things to apologize for. When you apologize, whether the people that you apologize to accept your apologies or not, whether it's for statements that you made or actions that you performed, they may accept it, they may not. Most likely they will if they love you, but at the same time they're still going to resent you. There's going to be resentment deep down because they understand that it's your actions that got you to this point in the first place, because you're the one that decided you need to smoke weed all day long. Nobody told you that you had to do this. And so then as a result, you made these poor choices when you didn't have any. Sober people understand that. It's easier for sober people to see that you're the one that put yourself in that position than it is for stoners to see it, because stoners have reasons and rationalizations. But the sober people, they don't have that. So like I said, they might accept your apology, but they're still going to resent you. And I got tired of being in that situation. I got tired of having things to apologize for. So, I mean, to be honest, I quit smoking weed to get a job. I quit smoking so that I could get hired to a company, because I knew that everywhere I went, they were going to drug test. And I figured, okay, as long as they don't do random drug testing, then once I get hired on, I can go back to smoking again. But the thing is, I made the choice on my own to quit. Not like what we were just talking about, where I was forced to be out of weed and I stopped because I couldn't get a hold of any. This is a conscious choice I was making, so I was comfortable and okay with it. And so therefore the physical withdrawals weren't so bad. I mean, it was tough, but it was a conscious decision. It was a trade I was making to accomplish something that was going to make things better in a wider spectrum. And so therefore it was worth it to me. It was a worthwhile trade. And so all the downsides of it were easier to deal with because I knew it was worth it. So I got the job. And rather than going back to smoking, I began to realize that I was making better choices. I was handling things better. I was having better conversations. I was being more responsible. I was being more reliable, and not just in other people's opinions, but in actuality. I stopped being late to things. I am on time to things. And it feels great. I have so many less problems now based on this one decision. Not to mention that I have a lot more money to pay my bills on time, to take care of the people that I love. I'm no longer stressing, okay, do I buy groceries or do I buy weed? Do I put gas in the car or do I buy weed? I don't ever have to make that decision anymore. And even amongst all of these things, amongst all of these reasons that I can see to stay sober, one of the main things that keeps me from going back is knowing what I said earlier, that with me it's all or nothing. If I were to smoke weed again, I know that I couldn't just take a hit with a friend here and there and be okay with that. Or just smoke at night before I go to bed. Nope. I would be right back to smoking all day long. And all of those things that I just described that made my life better, that are improvements, they would all go away. And I would go back to being a slave to marijuana and to my addiction again. How many of you out there are slaves and you don't even know it? I know that sounds uncool, but I really hope you stop and analyze this. I hope you take a minute and ask yourselves that question. Are you a slave to marijuana? You know, I know that it has a lot to do with being an addictive person. I have an addictive personality, and I'm aware of that. There are days when a cigarette sounds really good, but I know that if I had just one cigarette, I would be smoking cigarettes for the rest of my life. I would never stop. You know, there are days when it sounds like a good idea to figure out a way to get a pain pill or two and just relax for the rest of the day. But you know what? If I did that, I would spend the rest of my life figuring out ways to get pain pills and how I was going to pay for them. And I would go back to being a slave to my addiction. And the same goes with weed. So I think I've talked about this long enough. I think I've more than made my point. And I really hope that some of you out there got something from this. I hope that I gave you something to think about. I'm really hoping that I helped you make a decision. But if not, then I hope that I at least gave you something to think about. And that you'll at least consider making this change in your life. Because this one thing that everybody says is okay, and a lot of people will tell you it's cool, and a lot of people will give you their respect and support, but this one thing is a major key to making the changes you need to make in order to live the life that you really want to live. So, are you going to call it quits with the kush and watch every aspect of your life improve? Or are you going to stay a slave to Mary Jane and keep forgetting how to figure out how to make things better? Thanks for watching. See you next time.